G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. Today I finally have a Christmas pattern for you. I've just put the Grinch out the back for the minute and I have created a beautiful bear. This will be my Christmas gift to you all. It is a gorgeous, very traditional style bear and it's one I've been wanting to share with you. So many people have asked me for a traditional style German type bear in that sort of along the lines of the old Steiff bears. This is all very much that shape. But of course, when you make one of those bears in mohair, normally you have to trim that muzzle and get it all perfect. I've designed this one in a way that you can make it up in Sherpa or synthetic, or you can make it up in mohair. And I already have pieced the muzzle for you, so you don't have to do any trimming at all and you'll get that beautiful German Steiff sort of a look. So I've gone for the red, and you can imagine the colour schemes you can go for. Now, of course, this bear doesn't have to be made up as a Christmas bear. You can make it up over and over again, and I'm sure you all will, in some fantastic fabrics. Now, it does need to be made up in a pile fabric, and Sherpa is absolutely perfect for this one, and it's inexpensive, so give it a go. I know I'm still plugging my Sherpa, but it really is a great fabric. Team it up with the felt, and we are ready to go. We've got a beautiful traditional stitch nose that I really take you through this time so you can really see how to get that done, and it's absolutely spot on. So dressed him up at the end in just a beautiful candy striped scarf and some pretty Christmas things, and I think you'll really enjoy embellishing yours. Look at those little Christmas tree feet. So you can pop those in or not, totally up to you. I've got your free pattern ready for you. It's in the drop down description box below. You'll find a link there to your free pattern templates. You can print them out on your own home printer. Make sure to be using A4 size paper, and also pay attention to the measuring bar on every page that I've got for you to make sure that your pattern pieces are correct, and set your printer to be printing at actual size. So if you have any printing problems, of course, always speak to myself in the comments and we'll see how we can help you out. So I always include seam allowances in all of my patterns. That's nothing you need to worry about, just cut right there on the line. So let's get busy making a beautiful festive bear. So let's start by having a look at what we're going to need to make our beautiful Christmas bear. We're going to start with the body pieces. Now I'm making this one up in Sherpa. You could use a synthetic, you could use a beautiful mohair. This pattern is very, very adaptable. It's just put together in a way that makes it absolutely foolproof. We'll get that beautiful German traditional look without a whole lot of work. So the work's already been done for you in the design. So we start with our body pieces. Now my Sherpa has been treated with a PVA mixture. A lot of you have seen me do that. I will put a link at the top of the page here for you to go and have a look at my Sherpa review video. It will show you how to work with synthetics and particularly Sherpa. The backing fabric is a knit. We don't want it to stretch too much in different areas. So I use a PVA mix technique that we paint on the back before we cut our pieces out. So have a look there. Most of you are familiar with that technique by now. So these are our body pieces all cut out, ready to go. And then we have our arm pieces. So our arm pieces are made up with an inner arm that has a paw pad, which I've cut in felt. Now the felt is interfaced, and I have gone and added the outer arm there. So a pair, of course. So my colour scheme is just the red and the cream. That's what I'm going with here. So now we've got our arms, our body. Let's move on to the legs. So the legs, you should have two leg pieces like this. We actually fold them over and we pop our foot pad in here. Now the foot pads I've given you the opportunity to create a beautiful little Christmas tree on those foot pads. It's a really cute detail, and you can add as much embroidery to this as you like. I've just done a little gold star at the top and some little beads. So it's a reverse applique, but I've stitched it on the machine, so it's not difficult to do. And of course, you can imagine how much you could embellish that. Now, if you don't want to be adding a Christmas tree, or maybe you're just making this bear as a classic bear, then you just leave off that piece there and you just have your foot pad cut in the felt with the interfacing applied. This one, this piece, has fusible webbing applied to it. So we actually iron that one over the top, and that will give us our reverse applique there. So lots of options there, but if you're just making a classic bear, certainly just use your foot pads like that. Another alternative for your Christmas bear is just to use a print, a Christmas print for the paw pads. I do think with a classic bear, this look is a better look, but if you do want to make it perhaps just a more of a crafty sort of a bear, you can go ahead and use Christmas prints. I'm not a big fan of Christmas prints. So next we've got our legs, so now we can move on to the head. So we have the head pieces here. We've got our side head pieces, and we're going to be doing that pieced muzzle, which is going to give us that beautiful German style of bear with it, where it looks like it's got a perfectly shaved muzzle, but it is actually done in felt. So, but I've designed it in a way that the felt is cut to look exactly as it should for that trimmed muzzle. So what you need to do is you need to choose a felt that so closely matches your fur that you could imagine that the fur had just been trimmed away and that was the backing fabric. So that's the key. And of course you can make it up in any colour. So I really hope to have the opportunity to put this bear together, not as a Christmas bear, just in a neutral beige, and I'll match up my felt, fully colour it up, and you will see you can really make some amazing bears at very low cost that look like collectible, beautiful collectible vintage bears. So that's part of why I thought I would introduce this pattern now. It really is a two-way pattern for you all. So those are our head pieces all ready to go, and similarly with the ears, I've actually made the inside of the ears felt, which again is interfaced, and the outer ear is the Sherpa, because it gives us a neater, cleaner ear, and it also ties in with the muzzle, and I'm going to be trimming those ears super short to look like it's worn away. That vintage look is all worn away. So we're going to need our joints. So we have two 35mm arm joints. We've got two 45mm leg joints and a 45mm neck joint here. And this bear does need to be jointed. On top of that, you're going to need some eyes, keeping it very, very classic. These are actually, I think these are actually a 13mm. They're an eye I've had for a long time. They're a very, very deep amber and black, but it's going to work really well. It will look quite black once it's put into my bear. About 13mm. So you can use a 14mm eye, a 12mm eye, or if you're lucky to get lucky enough to find 13mm, that's what I'm using here. And just your extra little embellishments and beads for those foot pads will be stitching a traditional nose. Now, two ways you can do this. Have your little leather scrap ready for that nose template. If you want to make a vintage style bear, you may not want to sew a perfect nose. You might want to do a little worn nose just with a few crossover stitches so it looks like it's worn away. Either way, you'll need your pearl thread. I am using 5-ply this time. It's a bit heavier weight. Extra gold thread there just for embellishments and so on. And then of course at the end you need something to decorate your bear at the end around the neck, and that can be absolutely anything. I'm not completely certain what I'm doing there yet. I will work that out as I go along. So we're going to be starting this bear this time. We're filling with polyester filling, of course. I'm going to be starting this bear starting on the head this time. While I'm feeling excited and fresh, it's the best time to make a head. So let's get busy. So we need to start with our two side head pieces and our side muzzle pieces, and also our centre head gusset with the centre nose piece that sits in there. So we're going to first put together and create our full side headpieces. So we're going to put right sides together and we're going to pin this one into place. When you're using the Sherpa or fur, of course, you want to tuck that fur in as you go. You should have a slight point extending there with your felt. That's just part of your seam allowance. So just you can see that I'm using my pin to stroke that pile in. Line that up exactly. And these headpieces I have treated completely with my PVA mixture that I was talking about earlier. So they're actually quite firm and they don't have much stretch in them at all. It makes all these points much easier to pin and to sew. So I'm going to do that with both of those right sides together, and I'm going to overcast that first. I will overcast with extra strong thread every single seam I do, and then I will sew that seam, 4mm seam allowance, 2 times. I have a jeans needle in my machine and I have my stitch length set to a number 2. So that's our 2 side headpiece sorted, and then we've got our front muzzle piece. You can see that's on a curve. You've got marks on your pattern templates that show you to line up that center, and I'm working on the fur part of the head gusset, and I'm first of all going to put a pin straight through at the seam allowance, those 2 marks, and you want to make sure your pin goes exactly through those marks. And then it's just a matter of pushing that pin head all the way down, and you'll just line up the rest of that edge to bring those edges together and match that curve together. I go from side to side so that I'm getting it absolutely right. It's an important part of your bear, this part, and you want everything to be absolutely straight. And again, I will first overcast it and then I will stitch that seam 2 times. You may have a slight point extending on each of those. Again, that's just part of your seam allowance. So I will overcast it first and then I will machine stitch that 2 times. So that has our side head pieces assembled and our centre head gusset assembled. Now, if you're using mohair, you can use a wire brush to brush out your seams. Don't use a wire brush on Sherpa, it'll completely make it porous. I tend to go ahead, really roll my seam out and take my awl and just gently lift the pile out. And you want to make sure that that section on that muzzle there is a nice, beautiful, gradual curve. And do the same here, lifting that pile out. So now we're going to put right sides together on those side head pieces. And we are going to start at where the nose will be here, and we're going to sew the centre front chin seam there. Make sure that you match up your seams here under the chin. That's why we pay particular attention to our seam allowance, so that everything meets up and right down to the neck edge. Again, I will overcast that and I will sew that seam 2 times. Now, I always remove my overcasting stitch from this seam so that I can open out that chin seam nice and open and flat. You're always going to get a straighter muzzle and chin seam if you do that. So I've done that, then I can go ahead and really roll out that seam. And again, take your awl and lift out that pile from that seam there. So now we've got that nice chin seam all done. We're going to go ahead, make sure that seam is nice and open and flat. We're going to take our head gusset. We're putting right sides together and we're going to pin in place at that centre point there, straight through at your 4mm seam allowance and straight through that seam. That's actually a bent pin, so we don't want a bent pin there. I'm going to go with this one. Straight through there and push that pin head all the way down. Now you'll move across to one side and we're just going to pin in. Going to go through all the layers, flip it over, take up just a little on the other side, push the pin head all the way down. That's going to clamp it and hold it into place. Move across to the opposite side and we're going to do the same thing. Straight through both layers, flip it over, take up some on the other side, push that pin head all the way down. That will hold it nicely into place. And what we're looking to do here is line up the sides, and we should have the corners meeting. So right here on the corner where our head gusset starts to fan out, and you've got a clear corner here, they should meet up. And they do, because we've kept to our seam allowance. We want to take a pin straight through there, anchor that in. I'll do that on the other side. Make sure it's lined up on the other side as well. That's what gives us a nice straight muzzle. Get that all pinned into place. So you can see there that I've overcast where I've pinned it. So it's just that front nose section. Now I've rethreaded my needle with extra strong thread. I've got a knot in the end, and we are going to sew a stab back stitch to sew this section in. You do it by hand. It's the only way to get it accurate. And this is the most noticeable, prominent part of your bear, and it needs to be as spot on as possible. So we're going to start coming up from the underneath, and I'm going to go just straight over that seam allowance there, and I'm going to anchor in just a couple of stitches, one on top of the other, still sewing at our 4mm seam allowance. And now my stitch, I'm going to come up from the underneath at my seam allowance, bring that one through, and then I'm going to go back into the last exit hole I came out of. Easier to see as we move along. So I'm coming up from the underneath. I've moved along the length of a stitch. Keep your stitches nice and small, so it's just like a machine stitch, and then I'm going back into the last exit hole. That way we get a perfectly straight line. I will put a link at the top of the screen there for you. I've got a video that shows you just how to do this stitch, but you can see that each time I'm going back in and it's just linking up that stitch beautifully. You should be able to get a result that's just as straight as if you sewed it on the machine. Take your time with this. It is a really important seam in your bear. Pulling that nice and tight each time. You can see just how straight that is. I'm just going to work that stitch right the way around. Do a couple of stitches either side when you get to that center junction. Make sure it really is centered. Continue on again and finish up with 2 strong stitches. Now always make sure that you turn that nose section through after you've stitched this front seam, and check that you have got it all beautifully straight and even. You see how that should be, this section should stop here with the felt, and it should just extend on a little bit more with that head gusset section there, and make sure that it's the same on each side. Everything is all nicely pushed out and everything looks straight. Pop that one back through, and now we're simply going to continue on, and we're going to sew. We're going to pin, overcast and sew the side head seams. And I just do one at a time. Get them all pinned into place. Again, always tucking that fur in so that we're meeting the seams well, those edges well. And I will continue on, and you'll find that will fit in perfectly all the way down to the back of the neck. You'll also notice that I'm doing that work on the head gusset. So don't do it from this side on the side head. Do all of that work on your head gusset. Stitch that seam 2 times with that same 4mm seam allowance. Turn it around, and then you do exactly the same with the other side. Again, I'm still working on that head gusset, not on the side head panel. Get those both stitched into place, and then we'll be ready to turn that head through. And there we go, that has that head completely stitched up, and I've gone ahead and turned it through. I've pushed all those seams out again, and now all we need to do is stuff that head nice and firm. Now, traditionally, these bears, particularly the German style of bear, were packed absolutely solid, and you want to do that with this one because you really want to push out that muzzle section, and we're going to be stitching a nose So you want a nice firm base to be doing your nose embroidery on. Now you can use safety eyes in this bear if you want to. If you're going to do that, you'll need to temporarily fill this head so that you can get your eye placement correct. Then pop the eyes in, pull out that stuffing, pop the eyes in, clamp them down, and then stuff the head. I much prefer to use glass eyes here with this one, but if you are making it for a child under 3, you might want to add safety eyes instead. The benefit of adding the eyes afterwards is that you can get some really nice pull in and really sink them deep. So I'm going to start by really packing out that muzzle. It's a good size head, so you really can get your fingers in there and pack that in. I will also be using my forceps to help me get into all of those nooks and crannies. And the areas you need to really watch is you really want to fill out these seams here. You want to push everything out as you go. Rotate that head as you're stuffing it so that you're filling it evenly, and make sure that you're filling up into the top part of the head as well. We don't want any soft areas. This is an area that a lot of people don't seem to get to. You really want this pushed right out. So I'm going to get it all packed in firm, and then when I'm just a little way from the top, I'm going to use my felting needle. I'm going to pack it all in nice and flat, ready for that neck joint. So I have that head filled, and as you can see, it is packed super firm. Absolutely no give there. I've been careful to really fill out this section here, those top curves, and also make sure you give him some cheeks there. This nice firm muzzle is going to make it really easy for me to stitch that nose. Also, very German style bears, they have a very wide head, and they tend to have a flatter head. This section here is quite narrow, and because of the style of the body. But do make sure that you do put enough filling in to lift that out. You don't want it to be completely dead flat. So you can see there, we've got that nice basic rounded shape. So now we're going to go ahead, and I've needle felted in that bottom section. You can see there, it's nice and flat. It's ready for that neck joint to go in. I've gone ahead and sewn a running stitch just 5 millimeters in from that edge all the way around. I've left my tail ends hanging so that I can tie it off. And so now I'm ready to slip in that disc and just pull those threads in. And I'm going to pull that in as tight as I can around that neck bolt. It doesn't have to go in right close to the bolt, but it needs to come in far enough that none of that disc will be seen. Of course, the body and the joint will be on the other side. Pull that right in, knot that off at least 4 times. I usually have somebody here to put a finger on the knot. And then I do leave my needle on because I like to go around a second time, pull it in again and tie it off again. Our next step is to add our nose template. We're going to stitch our nose first, and we're going to cut our template out of a piece of leather. Now, leather is definitely best. You could use doubled felt, so 2 pieces of felt joined together with fusible webbing. Cut your template out of that because it's nice and firm, but I do find that felt's the best. And on the porous side of your felt, that's the side you want to add your glue to stick it on. You'll get the best adhesion. So we're just going to use some clear craft glue here, and make sure you glue right to the edges of that template. Don't overdo it to the point where it's going to flow out, but definitely get enough on there that all those corners are going to stick down. And particularly that little V tip at the base. If you're just going to be sewing a nose that is like a vintage little nose, you can do something like this, where you've just got a few random nose stitches across, and it does give it that very oldie sort of a look, which is really cute. I actually really love that look. Not what I'm going for with this bear, because I'm going for a very contemporary style, even though it's classic. So I've got all my glue there. Now, this nose position is absolutely key to this design, because the old German bears, most of their nose was across the top, so above your nose seam, and just that little point folds over. So the nose actually sits over like this. So get it nicely lined up in position, make sure that that base point is there. Get it all pressed into place, and I use the palm of my hand to press that down. The warmth from your hand does help start the process of that glue drying. And it will make sure that all of those edges are secured. You'll see now why it's important to have that muzzle section packed super firm. So our stitches are going to go down to here. We do a lip line and then we do a mouth line. So we start from about here. I'll show you that when it's completely dry. So you do need to continue to add a bit of pressure to make sure that everything is sealed, but you can see the positioning of that nose template. The majority of it is on the top section of the nose, just with that little fold over. So we're going to let that dry completely. While that's drying, let's go ahead and make the ears. So these are my ear pieces. Now I'm making mine, as I said, I want the red felt as the inside of the ear, but you could be making yours just with 2 pieces of your Sherpa or your fur. I do just like that very clean look, and it helps bring everything in together with our little felt accents in the face. So what I have done though, I've just taken off about 5mm of that pile on the lower edge. It just makes it easier for putting these ears together. And I'm going to do just that. I'm going to put my right sides together, tuck in all of that fur, and we're going to just pin right the way around, tucking that fur in right to the other edge. Now on your pattern templates you'll have 2 little marks that will show you. I haven't put them on mine, and you'll know exactly where to sew to. So we actually start at the little mark and we sew across with our 4mm seam allowance and all the way around and back across too. So we've just got an opening here with the ear. I do sew in a little way because it makes it much easier when you turn an ear through if you've got a little cornered point to push out, so it helps with closing that ear. So overcast that first and then stitch, and make sure that when you get to your corners here, just do a stitch back and forth either side of that corner. It will reinforce that point. So I'm going to get both of those put together and turn them through. I have both those ears turned through now, and I've gone ahead as always and pulled out all of the pile from those seams. I'm going to be trimming that ear fur, but first I'm going to go ahead, this is optional, but I like to take a little bit of clear craft glue and smear it inside between those 2 layers, because it helps seal the ear together, make it one piece, so when you curl it you get a better curl on the head. Now my masterclass friends, you can go ahead and add some warbler in there if you like, give you that really great result, but for now just a bit of clear craft glue will certainly do a good job. So I've just popped some clear craft glue on my little scrap of cardboard there. I'm just going to take a wooden skewer, take up some of that glue, and I'm just going to go in there and just smear a little bit of it across. Definitely don't do too much because you don't want any glue seeping through the ear, but it's just enough to seal those edges together, and try not to get it on the opening because you've got to turn that edge under. So just line up your edges, go ahead and press those together. It does help give a beautiful little cupped shape, and do make sure you get right up to those edges, and I like to encourage it into that cupped shape while it's drying. There we go. So once that is dry, I'll go ahead and just turn those edges under and do a little slip stitch to close it. So I'll just do the same with the other one. I'm going to put those aside to dry, then we will come back and we're going to stitch our very important nose. So now we're ready to stitch our nose and mouth in. So one of the most important tips I can give you here, first of all, I'm using 5-ply thread for this one because it's a larger bear, and this is Perle thread. I've taken the two, I've got a double strand, but I've taken the two ends and passed them through my needle. I'm starting with my largest doll needle, and then I've knotted the end, which is folded. The reason why I do that is if you make a stitch as you're going along and you get one wrong, you can get out of it. You can pull your needle off and remove just that last stitch. If you just take a single thread through to make a double strand and knot the end, you're tied into that. So it means you can't fix that nose. So that's the best tip. So I've got a really long double strand because we've got to stitch that whole nose. We've got to then do the mouth section, and we have to have enough thread to come in and out to do that. So first of all, I come in from the underneath and I come out somewhere just at the side. It doesn't really matter where. We've got a knot in the end that's going to hold. Then I'm going to go back into that same hole there, and I'm going to come out underneath that template there, and I'm going to come out, I might actually try and give you an exact measurement. It's probably about 1 centimetre, so 1 centimetre below, and we want to come out straight through that centre seam. This is going to create our lip line. So I'm going to dive back in, bring my needle out about here. So you can see that needle's come out at that seam, and it is just about 1 centimetre. It's maybe 11 millimetres to be exact. We're going to pull that one all the way through. Make sure that's nicely hidden where we went in, and make sure that it's holding and it's nice and firm. So we've got our 2 threads here now. Our first stitch, we're going to pull up, straight up. We're going to make sure they're not twisted, and we're going to go straight up to the top of that template. And we're going to take our needle and go in exactly on the edge of that template, right in the middle. You can change your needle now if you find it easier to work with a finer needle. Generally with 5-ply, I stay with my thicker needle, but you could take it down to a shorter one if that's easier for you. I stay with this one right the way through when I'm working with 5-ply thread. So I'm going to take that needle in, and I'm going to come out right next to it on this side. So right down to that lip line again, right down to the base, just this side of it. Okay, so I hope you can see that. It's tricky to see with the black, but our first stitch is a long stitch, and it's got those 2 threads, and I've made sure as I pull it in, you can see where I've come out, right next to the other one. I've made sure that I've pulled on each of those threads independently, and you really do want to pull it down quite firm. You can see that it'll pull in there at the top. That's okay, because all of our other stitches will pull that template down a little as well. It'll all end up the same. So now I'm going to take that stitch straight up that side. I'm going to take my needle in right next to where I entered before, and I'm going to bring my needle out this side. So just the same, but the opposite side. So we've got a nice thick top lip line, and remember what we're stitching here is a super traditional German vintage nose. This is the way that they're done. So needle dive in here, make sure your stitches aren't twisted, bring your needle out at the base here. So now I've got my 2 long stitches. Again, I've pulled on that thread independently, and I've made sure the tension is the same as I did with my first one. Now my next stitch, I'm going to pull up, and I'm going to place that stitch, making sure those threads again are straight. And I'm going to go in at the top there of that template, just the same as before, and you can see that's given us our beautiful lip line. But this time, once I go in here, I'm going to come out right at the base of that template, and we're going to start covering the actual nose template itself. So we go right up to this corner at the base and make sure it's right up against it. We don't want any gaps in our stitches. So again, place that stitch well. Really important to make sure the tension's the same, and come out there. I can't actually show you me doing it on camera because I'm a perfectionist and I need that nose to be perfect. So the angle I'm doing it for you here is not the angle that I would sew it. Okay, so you can see I've placed that final stitch, the third stitch, and you can see where I've come out. Right at the base of that template, and now our next stitch that we place, pull up, straight up, we can see there's no gaps here, and it's right on the edge of that template. We're going to take our needle, we're going to dive in here. I've kept the tension right. This time I'm going to cross over and we're going to come out exactly the same on the opposite side at the base of that template. So now my thread is down here at the base of that template, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm watching my tension is the same across the top there. You can see it's pulling it down evenly, and we're going to drop our next stitch straight up. Again, we're going to take our needle, we're going to go straight in there at the top of the template, and this time we're going to cross over and we're going to come right next to that one. Come out right on the edge so that there's no spaces. I'm going to come out there, pull our threads through independently one at a time, watching that, and each time we're just going to cross back and forth, placing those stitches. I do it this way one at a time. That's the best way to get a perfectly even balanced nose, and you'll have the same amount of stitches this side as you do this side. So go ahead and keep crisscrossing over, placing those stitches every time. Watch that top line as you go. When you get to your final stitch, I'll come back and I'll show you where we go from there, because then we drop down and we create a little mouth line. Okay, so that has my nose template covered. I hope you can see that. I kept all those stitches nice and even. There is no shortcut to a perfectly stitched nose. It is time and patience. So I used to have a sign on my workroom door when my children were little that used to say, "Not now, Mama's sewing a nose." So it's serious business. So our final stitch, so I've come out here at the base. I'm ready to place my final stitch this side of my nose. That's going to finish up that and keep it all nicely balanced. I'm going to take my needle and of course go in at the top of the template again, but this time I'm going to bring my needle out down to where I want the start of my smile to be. So the way to test that is to take a pin, put a pin where you think the edge of that smile is going to be, and you can actually test it by going around the pin and pulling up to that centre line, and you can see how that smile is going to look, because we're going to be taking our needle underneath those initial threads up and down and match it up on the other side. So I've got my pin there, I'm ready, I'm happy with that position. You can make it a deeper smile, you can make it a more of a severe V, it just depends on what you like. But traditionally, it's very, very balanced. So I'm going to take my needle, pop in there and exit here. Again, place that last stitch well and make sure that it's totally balanced and matching up with the opposite side. You can see I've taken that stitch from the top and down to the mouth here, and now we're going to be able to pull up and create that mouth line. So I take my needle and I'm just going to slip it underneath. I'm not catching any fabric. I just want to slip it underneath those stitches. So taking that needle through And again, you want to place that stitch. You want to make sure it's not twisted. Pull it down and then up into that lip line. Give it some nice tension, and then we're going to pull down on the other side. And all you need to do is enter again and match it up with the other side. So you can measure it if you like, you can eyeball it, whatever works for you. But that will give you the perfect little teddy bear nose and smile in a very, very traditional way. Also, remember you're pulling on this tension here. Check that that stitch at the top is still sitting correctly. Once it is, pop your needle in, come out at the base here and just knot off underneath. That will give us that beautiful little smile, and a good amount of pull in looks really good, so keep the tension up. And that has my completed nose and mouth. You can see very, very bare, very German and traditional. So our next step is to go ahead and add the eyes. A couple of things I do before then. First of all, we've got to find our eye placement, correct eye placement. And it really is right on that bend where the template, where the pattern goes in and then starts to come out again. I sit right here. You'll see where that sweet spot is. You can use your eye tester pins for this to check that you're getting that right, and you do want to look at that positioning from every angle to make sure that it's straight across the top and that it's even this way. Once you've got that and you're happy with that, go ahead and make a hole with your awl. I then use my fabric marker to put a mark there so I can easily see it. Then I enlarge that hole with my knitting needle. Done the same with the other side. It's going to help that eye sit into that socket. So the other thing that I do, first of all, I'm going to lift all that coat out around that spot, and I'm going to trim away the fur right around that spot, because I want fur surrounding the eye, so I want it to sink in there. So don't cut off a whole heap, we just want to create like a little pocket. You see there, I'm cutting right down to the backing fabric. I'll do the same on the other side. It helps make those eyes look like they're more sunk. I also make a passageway from this seam line up into the eye. So we're sort of looking up into the eye that way, following that muzzle line. And now when we set our eyes in, they've got that fur that's really going to come out around them. These are the eyes I'm going to be using. They're those very deep amber eyes. As you can see, they look completely black, but in certain light you can see there's a nice rich topaz behind them. That's 13mm. My tester pins are 12. You can see the difference. Both looks good. I wouldn't go larger than a 14mm with the eye. So now that I've done that, I actually want to do just a little bit of shading, and I'm only doing this because I have the right colour. When you're shading bears or anything really, adding shading, you're usually adding a deeper shade of what your fur backing fabric already is. So I've got a much deeper red here, and I'm going to do just a little bit of colour from that seam line up in and around where that eye is going to sit in place. And it's just going to give again the illusion of a deeper eye socket around that eye. The eye is going to be covering most of this. But remember I said we're creating a passageway up to the eye? Well, I'm highlighting that. You can do this with Artist Soft Pastels, but if it's a played with bear, you're better off using your alcohol markers. And certainly alcohol markers come in heaps of colours. This one just happens to be the perfect shade without being too loud. And you can test it, have a look at how your eye's going to look once it's sat in there. It just gives it a little bit of depth there. Now, while we're doing that, I'm going to continue on down that seam line a little. Only do this if your seam line is nice and straight. Don't highlight it if it isn't. And it's just very subtle. So fanning out here, bringing it down to that seam line. I'm going to go across the top of the nose. You'll notice also that I've got the ears just temporarily pinned into place. That certainly helps with getting your eyes in the right position, getting the expression right. So I'm just carrying on up and creating like a little triangle shape coming up the nose there. Really am surrounding that nose stitching. I'm going to go underneath. Just blending that out a little. And immediately it makes that nose really become one with the fabric rather than just sort of perched on top, if you understand what I mean. You can do as much or as little as this as you like, but in general, less is more. If you're unsure, less is definitely more. Now from here, we never colour above that lip line, we colour below it. If I add some depth here, it means it's going to send that chin section back a little and give you even more dimension to that beautiful mouth. So it's a little tiny thing, but it really does make a difference. So I'm just going to follow underneath the lip line, the mouth line, never on top. All your colour goes underneath. You have to think of it like it's shadowing. This is a bit of masterclass here for you all. Just a little bit of shading makes all of the difference. You can do a little more. You can blend actually your fur into your felt using that as well. You can do up around here. I'm not going to go overboard, just enough. And I will be sealing that nose with a gel medium sealant. So that's about all I'll do there. If you are using a more obvious colour and need to blend, use your colourless blender to blend all that colour up. So I'm going to make sure that's all trimmed away. Now I'm going to get my eyes threaded up. I'm going to be using dental floss tape this time because I really want some grip. You can use extra strong thread. So to add the eyes, as I said, I'm using satin tape, dental tape. You can use extra strong thread. I've got a doubled strand here, which I folded in half, and now I'm folding it in half again. So I've got 4 strands. I'm holding it in the middle here. I'm going to create a loop that I'm going to pass through the shank of that eye. Pull that through. I want to open out the loop. Open it up and take all 4 ends through it. And then I have that eye very, very secure on the end with those 4 threads. cut the ends, make sure the ends are even so that you can then thread it onto your large doll needle, which I've done here. So I've got the other eye all ready to go. So you've got your eye placement done. I'm just going to make sure I can see exactly where they are. I'm going to take my needle straight into that hole. I'm going to aim out the back, right down near the base, in the middle. And pull that one all the way through. You want to make sure that that eye is actually settled in that eye socket. If I give a tug on that, you can see that I can really pull that in. Okay, and this dental tape is really, really strong. So what I do like to do is just tie a knot in the end of one of these eye threads. It just makes it easier for me to know which eye I'm pulling on when I'm tying them in. It just helps me know. Now, flip that over, find the hole that you just came out of with those, and enlarge it with your awl, exactly that hole. Go back in there and really enlarge it, because now we're going to do the same thing with the other eye. Get it threaded up on our needle, we're going to go straight in and we're going to bring our needle through exactly the same hole. You can't catch any threads because you want to tie those eyes off into the stuffing of the head, not on the surface. Now that they're both in position and I've got both the threads coming out that same hole, I've tied my first knot. That helps me pull it in. So now if you find that dental tape is a little too grippy, sticky, just use a little bit of talcum powder on your fingers and you'll find it's just about right. But that grip does help, and also you might get a little bit of wax here on the eyes. Don't worry, we'll clean all that off. So now with my thumbs, I can really push those eyes into position and keep the tension up on the back and sink those eyes super deep. Remember that no matter how deep you sink them, as you knot it off and snip it off, it'll just slacken a little. So I tend to over sink them. We do want some nice depth. Keep the tension up, pull on each side equally, check it from every level that it's right, and then you want to knot that off at least 4 times before you snip those thread ends. When you snip the thread ends, the knot will sink back into the head and it will be completely invisible. And that has those eyes beautifully sunk. There you can see, you can do any extra trimming you need to do if you like. I'm just going to show you what I do with the ears. That same shading I've done on the outer edge of the ear, just right on that seam line. Again, gives it that sort of vintage look. And I've trimmed the ears, so I've taken all the fuzzies off. Now when you trim ears, you actually trim on a slant like this, going backwards. As you can see, I've already done it, but I'm just trimming the fuzzies again. And then you trim the length off, so you trim it down to as short as you want it. And then you turn the ear over and you round off the back. So you've got your scissors on a slant again. So you've got a rounded finished look. You never just take the ear with all of that fur and just chomp around, chomp it short. It will just look dreadful. You want to angle it out and curve it over. So then you've got beautiful ears. I'm just going to pin them temporarily in place. So just another tip too, you could really Christmas this up and do what I did on my memory bear. A lot of you have made my memory bear. You can thread up your doll needle and come in from the back of the head again, and you can add a couple of metallic stitches over the top of those nose stitches, I'm going to keep mine quite plain and classic, but you certainly can add some shine and different colours there if you like. Now what I'm going to do now, I'm going to gloss that nose with my gel medium. So this is a heavy gel gloss medium. You buy it from art supply stores. It's an artist product. Please don't buy anything from a teddy bear supplier that's called nose gloss. It's awful stuff. This is beautiful artist quality, non-yellowing, and it stays flexible. It dries perfectly clear. So you just want a soft brush, a fine brush. The best thing about this is it's going to keep all of your nose stitches in place forever. And it looks like a traditional waxed nose. So I simply get some on my brush and work it into those stitches, and I'm going with the stitching lines. It's just such a great finish, and very carefully down this front section here. Go right in to where those stitches start. And if you've got any of the edge of your template showing, go over that as well. It's going to bring it all together beautifully. So there we go, a nice even coat of that gloss. It will dry completely clear. Another little tip, particularly as we're making a Christmas bear, while that is wet, you can sprinkle a little bit of glitter on that nose, let it dry, then recoat it with this again, and you'll have just that little bit of shine. So we're going to put this one aside and we're going to get started on the body. Now onto our body, and we've got our body back pieces and our body front pieces. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to put together our body front pieces at the center front. So I'm going to sew that center front seam, matching it at the neck, and right down to that point at the base. And if you've added your PVA mixture to all of your corners and points, you'll find it's much easier to be able to pin that because it's got some hold about it. So again, we're going to tuck our fur in all the way, pin it and overcast it first. Then we're going to sew that 4mm seam 2 times. And on the back pieces, we're going to put right sides together again. This is our back opening, so we keep that open. And again, on your opening, you should have your PVA mixture so it won't fray away. Makes closing easy. So same there, right down to the bottom point and up to the top of the slight hump at the back of the neck. Match up your marks there and pin here to here, and we're going to sew from the bottom just to that mark. Make sure you really back and forth here a few times because that's where we're going to be stuffing and jointing through, so it needs to be very secure. You sew that one 2 times, the same 4mm seam allowance. Then we're going to do the same from this mark, back and forth a few times to the top of the neck, and sew that one 2 times as well. You can go ahead and turn each of those through. So that's our back, that's got our opening, and our front, that's the center front seam. So what I also like to do is just open my overcasting stitching just at the bottom of each piece, because now we're going to take those 2 bottom seams and we're going to put them together, right sides together, and match up those center seams. Pin or clip that into place. You've just got to make sure it's absolutely spot on, so I like to take a pin right through the center of both of those seams, and then you just go ahead and line up the sides. So we're sewing the side seams of our bear's body here. We will do the same thing. We will overcast it. So you're going to pin that all the way to the top. Match it up all the way to the top, and the same with this one. And then you can sew that one on the machine right the way around, really reinforce at the bottom here and up to the top neck edge, and you will sew that as a 4mm seam allowance again, 2 times for strength. Now once you have that body all sewn up, go ahead and take a double strand of extra strong thread, and just as we did with the head, we sew at about 5mm in from the edge. We sew a running stitch around the whole neck edge, starting from the back, and you leave some tail ends hanging because we need to tie it off. So right the way around, come back. I've tied my first knot there, and we're just going to pull it in. And we just need to pull it in and leave just enough room for our bolt to pass through with that neck joint. There's a lot of plush there, so there's plenty of room. Knot that off at least 4 times and snip those thread ends. And you can also go ahead and make the holes for your arm and leg joints at the marks indicated on your pattern, and then we can just turn this one through and push out all those seams. And that has our completed body ready to go. We can put that one aside. Now let's move on to our arms and legs. Now I have completed one arm and one leg already. So this is a little arm. Now these ones I have in traditional style. I have clawed these, and you can see with our, if you're using Sherpa, you can get some really nice sculpting in there just with your trimming. And this is a beautiful Christmas tree foot pad there. Again, clawed that foot. So just all that bit of extra detailing is really, really nice. Let's start with the arms. And the first thing we need to do with the arms, of course, is we've got an inner arm which has your joint spot on it. And then we have our paw pad. So you can see the curve of the arm matches the outer arm. First thing we're going to do is we've got to sew that paw pad into place. We're going to do that straight across there, lining up those 2 edges. And of course, as always, I always overcast mine first. It's important that everything lines up here. It's the same 4mm seam allowance, and we do sew it twice because we stuff that arm quite firm. So just overcast first and sew that seam 2 times. Next, now that paw pad is in place, we put right sides together, and I'm doing all of my work on the outer arm. The reason why I do that is it helps the finished arm just curve nicely inwards. It really does make a big difference, and just make sure that you do that with both of those arms when you're pinning and when you're doing your overcasting. So the first places that I pin are my opening, so I know that that's correct. Match up your marks there. And then you're going to continue to pin right the way around that arm piece. Make sure it's all nice and even. And we're going to sew, we're going to overcast first, starting here right the way around up until this opening, the bottom of the opening there. Then we sew that seam 2 times. It's 4mm seam allowance again. Do make sure you really go back and forth on your start and finish here, because this is where we add the joint and where we stuff it, so it needs to be very strong on those openings. And again, those openings should have your PVA treatment on them, so they have very little stretch and they won't fray away. Now while I'm doing the arms, I always go ahead and do the main sewing part of the legs as well. So you have your leg piece, you simply fold it over. Again, we've got opening marks there, and those are the first ones we pin into place. Pop my pin straight through there. That also has the PVA mixture on that opening. It really does make closing those openings much easier in the end. So with the leg, we actually sew from the top here down to the start of that opening, and then from here right down to the edge of the toe. This is left open, of course, because we're going to add our foot pad. Again, you sew that 2 times. Now that you have both of those stitched, we can put that leg aside because we're going to come back to that. We're going to continue on with the arm. Go ahead and make the hole for your joint spot there, and then we're going to turn this one through. It's easiest using your forceps. Pop that one through from the end. And we're going to push all of those seams out again using our knitting needle, and you really want to make sure that you get a lovely rounded finish to that paw pad. And now we need to add that joint to the arm, and we do this on the arms and the legs in the same way. So I'm just going to add some clear craft glue on the underside of that joint. It's just going to stop it spinning when we do it up with the spanner on the other side, and it means you can finish all of your work on your bear's limb and close it up, which is much easier doing it off the bear. So now we're going to take that, tuck it in, bring it up through that hole that you've already made there. There it is. Make sure that you press down firmly, get that fabric right down around the bolt. And I like to pop the rest of the joint pieces on. It just helps it clamp it down while it's drying, and it means I can go ahead and do the rest of the work on my arm without having to wait for that glue to dry. So I really do tighten that up, and that's going to hold that all together and keep it all straight and in place. So my next step now is to go ahead and fill that arm. When I'm filling an arm, I also hold the arm with the outside of the arm facing me, because when I'm filling, I tend to fill in like this, and I'm still going to get, I'm encouraging that nice curved little hand. So just piece by piece as you go, make sure you really fill out that hand well, because we're going to be doing those little claw stitches on it. Nice and firm all the way up to the top of the shoulder, and then use your wool felting needle to pack all of that filling in. Get right up close to the edge here, and then we'll come back and close that opening. That arm is now packed nice and firm and ready for closing. I've used my felting needle in there, so all that filling's tucked in out of my way. What you do want to do too, as you're filling those arms, check with the other one that you're filling them evenly, that they're a matching pair, that the little turn out of the paw is the same, and it's all balanced. You want a beautifully balanced bear. So now we're going to go ahead and close that opening. When you're working with Sherpa, it can be helpful just to trim away just the pile that's right on the edge. Don't go any further than just the edge there, because it will show. And depending on the mohair, if you're using mohair, you might want to do the same with that as well, but just don't take too much off because you will see it. So we're going to start by having a single strand of extra strong thread. I've got a whole big pile of knots in the end. I might just bring that a little closer for you so you can really see that. I will put a link at the top of the screen there for you so you can have a look at my video on the lattice stitch, which shows you up close. This can be a bit tricky to see because I have to use the right coloured thread. In that other video I show you with a darker thread, it's easier to see. But we're going to start right where that seam starts to open out. I'm going to take my needle and come in at the seam allowance, which is our 4mm seam allowance, right there at the top, coming from the underneath. That big pile of knots is going to hold. I'm going to take my thread across, and exactly straight across in the same spot on the other side of the seam, I'm going to take one stitch. So I've just travelled down the length of one stitch. So now I've got one stitch going over. If I pull on that, you can see already it's going to pull it in. Now I'm going to come back over to this side, and I'm going to go back into the hole that I first started with, where those knots are. and I'm going to travel down one stitch just like I did on the other side. You need to get into a really comfortable position doing this and where you've got really good light. Now I'm going to pull on those stitches and you can see it's pulling that seam in together. So now I'm going to go back across to the other side and I'm going to go back into that last exit hole. Travel down again, keeping my stitches nice and even. I pull on that again, you see that seam coming in together. Back across again, find that same hole and travel down just the length of one stitch. So it's just back and forth and back and forth, and every time I make a stitch I give that a good tug and pull that in to pull those edges together. It will slacken off as you go and you've got to dig in there and find where that last hole was, but do pull it in each time because it does have memory and it will pull in and close well. If you stitch it loosely all the way down to here, then you try and pull up all those threads, they won't pull up nice and neat. So I'm just going to continue on and you just go back and forth. Make sure that you're doing it evenly either side so that it's closing evenly and you don't get down to here and you've got some puckering on one side. And then when you finish off, just straight out through the arm, make a little knot and loose that knot. So now your next step, depending on the style of bear that you're making, if you're wanting to make that real traditional look, it's a good idea to trim back the fur on the end of the paw, and I'm going to be adding claws. Now you might just have made up your arm and you're perfectly happy with your bear just like this. That's absolutely fine. I really want to create that real vintage look. So remember when we trimmed off the ears, we use our scissors on a bit of a slant. We're not just chomping in, we're actually sculpting the end of that paw. So then I'm going to take my length off, but I'm tapering it out. Bring it down as short as I want it. And then I'm going to round it out over the edge of the paw. So Sherpa's really good. It sculpts really well with scissor sculpting. It does nicely take off that fuzziness. It's just to give you that idea that the paw pads are worn from lots of lovely hand holding. And we do the same with the toes. And by doing this too, your claws, if you're adding them, are going to be more visible. So you're really sculpting with your scissors. We don't want to see any chomp lines. Take your time with it. So that's nice and short. So now we're going to go ahead and add those 4 claws, 1, 2, 3, 4 there. And again, what I have is my 5-ply pearl thread, a doubled strand, and I've taken the 2 ends through the eye of that needle again for the same reason that we did with the nose, so that we can pull a stitch out if we need to, if we get it wrong. So there's a knot in the end, and I have my claw positions pinned into place. I've already done one hand, so I've been able to match them up and put them in the same place, but you can see how I've done it. It's just on that top curve and keep them the same distance apart. So then I'm going to come in just somewhere at the back of the hand, and I'm aiming to come out at one of those pinpoints. Now we're coming out on the fur, not on the felt. So right on the edge there is where that claw is going to start. Some people bring the claws over onto the paw pad. I don't like that, and traditionally they're not done that way. So it's just a matter of finding that spot which I've got right there. Remove that pin, and then I can pull that all the way through. Now again, we want to hide that knot. So we're going to find the entry hole there and just enlarge it a little so that that knot will pop in. We usually hear a crack. There it goes. And it's going to hold right there on that paw. So now I'm going to pull this one over, keeping my threads nice and straight, not twisted. I'm going to check with my other hand and see just how far in I went. I'm bringing it inwards, just not too far inwards. You can measure it and be exact if you like. I tend to just follow my needle and give me a good idea of about where. I'm going to dive back in and I'm going to come back out at another point. It doesn't really matter where, but another one of your pin points here. There we go. So that's our first claw in place. That goes a fair way back. And keep that tension up. You want them pulled in nice and tight. Again, I'm going to lay that stitch. I'm being careful to watch my other paw, make sure I'm getting it the same. I'm going to dive in at the same depth and come out just up at this pinpoint. Again, keeping that tension up. I've got my third claw in place. I'll be matching mine to the other side. Diving in, coming out at my final point. Again, being really careful to make sure it's in the fur section, not through my felt. Pull that through, placing that stitch nicely, keeping up that tension, and my last claw is going to go in place, dive in, and then I'm going to come out somewhere on the underside of the arm up here. Pull on both of those threads independently. We don't want a loose thread. So at the moment our claws aren't super visible, but we're going to do some trimming around them. So to finish off, simply get down to that backing fabric, take your needle in, take a little tiny stitch, make a knot, pull that knot right down to the surface and go back into that starting hole. Come out the other side, you'll be able to pull that knot through and sink it right into that arm, where it will be completely hidden with your pile. Pull on that tight and snip that off. Your thread ends should be lost. So now we've got our little claws in place. So now you want to spend a bit of time pulling out that fur so we can give it a little trim. And I do use my marker, permanent marker here too. So they're a little fuzzy there at the moment, so I'm just going to just trim the fur away, just so we can really see. Always lift the fur out first. So really just trimming along those claw lines so that they're nice and visible. rounding those little fingers as they were. As I said, this is only for a look for a really, really traditional bear. I don't generally like claws. I very rarely do claws, but they do look great on this style of bear. And it's another way to add a bit of detailing to your bear. So now I'm going to take my marker, which is the deep red that I used on the face, and I'm just going to really go between each claw. Just to really sink them in. Just don't get any colour on the paw pad itself. The only area that I add any colour, I'm going to switch to the other end. Is right on the underneath. And I'm colouring the fur, not the paw pad. Just gives that little bit more dimension. And of course this is all totally optional. You don't have to go to these lengths to make, you'll still make a beautiful bear if you just make it up as is. So I'll spend a little time trimming those till they look like this. Now we've already sewn up the leg, and of course I have my other foot made up. So if you're wanting to create the little Christmas tree feet that I've got here, then we're going to take the foot pad. Now we have our foot pad that's cut with our interfacing applied, and then we've got our piece to go over the top to do our reverse applique, and that's our little tree. Remove that paper, line that up on your foot pad, it should fit exactly, and you want to press that one into place with a hot iron and a protective cloth. If you don't want to add the detailing, of course, you're just going to sew that foot pad in just as it is. So I've got that all nicely fused together. Now I want to show you a little trick. With this one, I just machine stitched around that whole tree template, but it can be tricky doing that on the machine and getting that close. You can of course just sew a little hand sewing running stitch. If you do that, I would use probably just your extra strong thread in an appropriate colour, or of course you could use embroidery floss, but I want to sew it on the machine. I want that really neat machined look. But it can be tricky when you've got it under the needle to see exactly where your points are. So I take a heat erasable marker and I put a little spot at each of my pivot points. So that really helps me stitch that up real nice and close to the edge, and I'm not going to go too far or come too far out. Then I can just press it again with the iron and protective cloth, and those marks will be gone. So I just stitch that in a matching thread to my cream. Okay, so now that's nicely stitched into place, and you see it's a lovely neat finish. So now all I need to do is go ahead, I've got my little beads here ready, and I'm just going to stitch my beads onto each point, and I'll do just a little crisscross star at the top I'll use my metallic thread to match there. Very simple. Of course, you could embellish this any way you like, but remember, don't go too far to the edges because we've got to sew that foot pad in, and nothing that's too bulky. So I'm going to go ahead and do that using my extra strong thread with the appropriate colours and add those little details. And that completes my little Christmas tree foot pad, all ready to go into the leg piece. So I have opened up the seam on my toe, just the overcasting stitch, so I can flatten that out there. And we're going to make sure it's the top of your Christmas tree going into the toe. You've got your mark there on your pattern piece. If you've kept to your seam allowances, this foot pad will fit in absolutely perfectly. Put my pin all the way through, flip it over. You've got a mark also on the back of the heel that you want to line up. Again, with the mark on your foot pad. Again, pop that all the way through. And we're just going to line up those edges, making sure you keep this anchored at the centre. And we're going to pin it in just as we did the nose gusset, through both layers. Take up some of the fabric on the other side, push that pin head all the way down. It just holds everything into place really well. You can see that's fitting in really nicely. It's going to slip in there beautifully right the way around. Get that all pinned into place and then overcast it into place and remove all your pins. And now that I have that one all hand stitched into place with my overcasting stitch, I can just go ahead and sew that foot pad in with my stab back stitch, which is the same stitch that we used when we sewed in the nose section on the head. And I've given you that video to have a look at, my video that shows you up close how to sew a stab back stitch. So check that out, and that's the absolute best way to sew in a foot pad. If you try and do this on the machine, you're never going to get a beautiful rounded finish, and it's one of the most visible things on your bear. So what you want to end up with is the perfect shape. You don't want any strange turns in there. So sewing it by hand is always the best. So get that one sewn into place and then we can turn that through. And there is my second leg all turned through, and I've pushed out all of those seams, and I've added my joint just as we did with the arm, slipping that inside with the glue and fastening it there. So now I can go ahead and fill that leg, packing that very, very firm. As I showed you, no giving this leg at all. And I'm going to be using my wool felting needle to pack in all of that stuffing again, and you just close the opening exactly the same as we did with the arm. So I'm going to get that second leg finished, and then we'll come back and I'll show you about the positioning of those claws. So that has my second foot pad in, and I have gone ahead and I've trimmed away the top of the toe section just as I did with those paw pads on the hands. Also, when you're filling these legs, as I said before, match it up with the opposite side and make sure you're getting it all filled. You're not just filling a hole when you're stuffing, you're actually creating a shape, you're sculpting as you go. So now I've gone ahead and matched up the same claw marks on this side with my pins, and I've trimmed it off as I said. I'll do some extra trimming as I did on the paw, and I've got my long needle again with my doubled strand of my pearl thread. Again, I'm going to come in from behind, come out on the first section, one of those claws, and create the claws in the same way that I did on the paw. You can see how far I've come back there. You could go deeper if you like, or shorter if you like, totally up to you. I'll get that one finished, coloured up, and we'll be ready to put this bear together. So let's go ahead now. We've got all of our body parts and start putting this beautiful bear together. So of course, we've already made the holes in our body for our arms and legs. We're going to take the appropriate leg, make sure you have got the right one, and the toes are pointing forward. Pop that through that hole. You want to add your corresponding disc. And then your washer. And then your nut. Just get that nut in place, and then we're just going to finger tighten it at this stage to make sure that we've got everything in the right place. Tighten that up. You want to really make sure that you pull out all that fabric, that nothing's caught up, and we've got a nice clean joint, which we have there. Once you're happy with that, you want to go ahead with your spanner or whatever it is that you're using and tighten up that joint. Now, these joints compress over time. Whatever the fabric is, gets squashed and compresses over time, so the joints become more loose. So you always tighten your joint tighter than you would want it to be eventually. So I always tighten them until I can only just with a lot of force move them, and then that's about it. So once you've got that where you want it and you're happy with that, you go ahead and add 1 drop of super glue into the thread there of the bolt where the nut is, and that's going to drop in there and fill that cavity, and that nut is never going to come adrift. Once you've done that, go ahead and you add the second leg the same way, and then exactly the same technique to add the arms. So with arms and legs in place, final step of course is that head. So we just go ahead and do that in the same manner. We've got that hole that we left there. Stand little bear on his head. Add that disc, washer, and that nut. Now I don't make my neck joints quite as tight because I want them to be a little more posable. Pull those ears off for now. And I do want to make sure that everything is definitely pulled out around that neck. I'm going to go ahead, tighten that one up. Give it a little bit more movement on this one, and again add that little drop of super glue. There we go. So now we can go ahead and fill our bear. So a couple of tips with this. First of all, always make sure that you fill well around the joints. Also up underneath the neck there to hold that head up, and also at the back of the neck. Now these bears have a little hump at the back, a little traditional hump, and you want to make sure that that's well pushed out as well. Gives them that whole shape. Now the one thing you do want to avoid is overfilling the body just directly underneath the arms, because we don't want arms that are sticking out like this. If you overfill under there, that's exactly what will happen. We want the arms to sit nice and naturally at the sides. Other than that, I pack the body nice and firm. You can have it a little softer if you like, but it's important that those major areas are filled out. When you get to where it's all filled up, do the same thing as we did with the arms and legs. Pack that in with your wool felting needle, and we'll come back to close that opening. So that has my bear all beautifully filled out. I've got enough room left there to squeeze and be able to close that opening well. Haven't added too much filling immediately under here, under the arms, kept that fairly soft, and these areas nice and firm. So now you just need to go ahead and do the same as you did with the arms and legs to close that opening. I've trimmed some of that fur away. If you find it easier on the back, you can use a curved needle for sewing that, ladder stitching that closed. The curved needle can be easier for tucking in and then out again. Totally do what works for you. Best position I find is over my lap for doing a back closing. So here we have our almost completed little currently deaf bear, and we're ready to add the ears. Now I have pinned the first ear on in place. I like them to sit fairly high with a very deep cupped shape. So the last thing that we want to see is this, is bear's ears put on like this, straight across. It's a very unattractive look. You want a really great curve to it, and it's really simple to do. Now because I put that glue in between the layers, you can see just how strong that ear is. It really does hold that cup shape well, so it won't be collapsing on itself. So I've got my pin there that tells me where I've lined it up to where the next one should go. First of all, when you put your pin in, you've taken it through the very front of that ear. You want to over angle it the opposite way. So your pin's going in like that, and then we're going to push the ear straight back. And we're going to put a pin in, it's about just over an inch behind. That's going to hold the ear in that position. Then we can curl it around and see how it keeps that height and it keeps that beautiful cupped shape. I will check that. But on these ears, these traditional style ears, the lower edge of the ear should sit just a little further back than the front of the ear for the best look. I'm going to throw a pin in there as well to anchor that in place and check that it's matching up with the other ear. So you want to also go around and put some pins in behind to hold that all down in place. I'm going to turn that one towards me and get that really pinned in right. So I'm pretty happy with that placement there. You can see nice and balanced, really cupped there. Make sure that you've looked at it from every angle, from the top, behind and across the front there. So once you're happy with that, we're going to get I've got a medium dowel needle with a long single strand of extra strong thread, big pile of knots in the end. We're going to start the easiest way to sew ears on. We're going to come in at the back of the head, and we're going to come up right at the front of that ear there, right where that pin's going in. And we're going to bring our needle out. Most of you have seen me do this many times. Just as we have throughout before to hide a knot, make that little entry hole larger with your awl and pop that knot in. So there we go, my thread coming out through here. And then I've pulled that knot is going to hold. I'm going to take my needle, take up some of that ear, dive into the head, and I'm going to come out at the base of the ear here. So now my thread's down at the base of this ear. We're going to take up some of that ear fabric, dive in, and we're going to go back up to where we started again. So now we're at the base of the ear. We're going to dive in again, take up some of that ear fabric, take our needle across to come back up to our starting point. So I'm going to travel back and forth between those two spots through the head, catching a bit of the ear each time, about 3 or 4 times, so that I've got the front and base of the ear nicely anchored in place. So now I'm back up the top of the ear here, and all I need to do is travel along just a little way at the back of the ear, dive in and come out just a little way along at the base of the ear here. So I'm going to keep doing the same thing back and forth until I've covered the entire ear curve and it's all settled into the head. You can go through at any angle you like. Just make sure that you're capturing that whole edge. When you've finished and the ear is nicely anchored in place, simply come out somewhere at the back of the head, make your tiny knot in the surface and sink that knot into the head. Then just repeat with the other ear. Just make sure that you're matching them up well. And so here is my completed Christmas bear, and I've put a beautiful little scarf. I've just made a very simple little candy stripe scarf. I've really wanted to keep it all very tonal, this one, with lots and lots of reds. So just a little bit of green foliage around his neck, a few little embellishments to make a wreath. That scarf first in place brings it down on his front, and you can see that's really all he needs. I can't wait to see what you all do with this pattern. And remember, that beautiful style, it just makes up absolutely gorgeous in any mohair and any coloured Sherpa. Make him up as a natural classic bear. Would just look absolutely wonderful. Of course, he would wear a beautiful and ugly Christmas jumper really well too, wouldn't he? I wished I'd have thought of that earlier. But I hope you love the shape, and I think it's a great classic bear pattern for you to have a whole lot of fun with. Thank you for joining me, everyone. So I'm ready to see all of your beautiful festive bears. I know some of you will go absolutely all out. I know there will be some Santa hats and all sorts of things. You know, I'm not really a Christmas person. I'm not against Christmas. I just don't like the decor. There you go. But I do love this little guy, so I hope you love him too. So come and join us on our Facebook page if you haven't already. Share your beautiful creations there. Anything you've made with my patterns, you can go ahead and share there. Thank you all so much for your response to my Cheshire cat in masterclass. I hope to see some more of you over there to give him a go. It's not as daunting as it might look. And if you love bright colours, you're going to love him. Also, come and talk to me on Instagram. If you're ever trying to get my attention, that's the place to get it. I'm never going to miss a message on Instagram. So come and see me there. You've got that address across your screen there where you can find me. I put up as many bits and pieces up there as I can. It's had a good old facelift. And I think you'll really enjoy seeing some of the older pieces as well. So everybody stay safe. Consider this my Christmas gift to you all. I'll have another one coming up really soon. In the meantime, keep on being creative, everybody. Stay safe. And remember to pay all of those good things forward, because that's why we started this in the first place. So until next time, it is hooroo from me.